Welcome to this review of the book Rethinking Citizens and Democracy, authored by Tendai Murisa. My name is Belinda Chora, and today Tendai is reviewing with me Citizens and Solidarity, with this chapter 5 of the book. Tendai, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tendai, in this chapter you talk about how citizens have worked to mobilize themselves and solve economic and developmental challenges. Give us an overview of what that looks like.
That is the issue, right? Because we, in terms of discussing development in Zimbabwe or in any other third world or global south country, we tend to focus on what either international donors are doing or what governments are doing. And we miss on the organic agency of citizens, the citizen-to-citizen solidarity and frameworks. But studies have shown that in a country like Zimbabwe, for instance, I think last time we checked was like 48% of citizens in this country have never received any aid from an NGO. They've never interacted with an NGO. And they've also have to deal with the collapsing state services. So you ask yourself, how are these 48% surviving? And another study of Shamva shows us that 1 in 4 of households belong to an association of sorts. And these associations are engaged in different ways of creating solidarity around economic opportunities, around welfare. Because, I think one of the most common formation that we know in Zimbabwe is the burial society, followed maybe by the savings associations, the rotating savings groups, etc., etc. So those are sites. Those are sites of either creating solidarity at the time of bereavement and also making sure that their financial resources are available to bury a loved one. So that has always happened. Before we've had these big insurance companies, citizens have always come together as 12, 15 members, 20 members, organizing around that and putting aside resources for that. Then women, especially women, have always been engaged in some form of savings associations, etc. So this is something that is not new. It's something that we've always had in our DNA. For some of us who were raised by single parents, we remember in many instances how those savings, even savings through groceries, etc. So, but half the time when we talk about development, we're looking for the big funds. We miss these components. But these are the things that keep lives going. So it's very important for us to start there and to begin to say, when we're now moving over and we're looking at where are other civic capacities, we see them building upon that. So, for instance, we see when you come to Harare, there was a case study that we were tracking of women in Budiriro who started off as a backing group, but because of the breakout of cholera in their area, they started digging trenches in front of their houses so that water can flow, wastewater can flow, etc. So already thinking of saying, of course, we're a backing group, we share notes about backing, but we're also worried about the safety and the health of our children. Then they begin to produce these public goods that a local authority could not produce. You see the same in Bulawayo. There's been a campaign to keep Bulawayo clean. It's actually called #Keep Bulawayo Clean. It's literally about citizens coming together just to continue keeping the city clean by picking up litter, etc., etc. So these are things that citizens do. Come to COVID-19, we actually begin to see a more concerted effort by citizens to begin to say, look, there were predictions that countries like Zimbabwe would not make it out of COVID. There were predictions that there was going to be death on the streets. But we began to see citizens coming together. And in this chapter, I talk about the Solidarity Trust of Zimbabwe, how it sort of came together and began to help in rehabilitating health facilities, mobilizing consumables to do with COVID-19, face masks, etc. And they even went to an extent of revamping a hospital here in Harare. So that's very important. Then we also had, as an organization that I work for, we also joined with a funding institution, and we went and contributed towards rehabilitating or revamping a feeding kitchen in Epworth, just to make sure that there's opportunities for citizens during that time of lockdown where vulnerability was growing. So these are some of the things that we look at in that chapter, how citizens organize solidarity.
In this chapter, you also talk about philanthropy by the poor, talking about how citizens are giving to each other and working to help each other in times of crisis. But you also talk about an interesting concept, ephemerality of this process. What does that mean?
So in many instances, those who study philanthropy they study it from a certain vantage point. They're looking for an institution, they're looking to understand the long-term strategy, etc. So when you come to a place like Zimbabwe and many other African countries, you miss it because it won't be like that. But what we begin to see is philanthropy is responsive to a need. So it's not just philanthropy that just happens on day-to-day basis. So we have Cyclone Idai. Then we have communities trying to respond to Cyclone Idai. That context, that they have people who have been affected by a cyclone and they need resources. So I call those ephemeral pools of giving. They are temporary. They are not just going to stay there. They emerge around a crisis. So we saw ephemeral pools of giving around COVID-19. We still see them up to now. You see, if we announce, for instance, that there's a friend of ours who has been in a disaster or something, you see the coming together. But half the time, even us as people who are studying philanthropy, we are yet to develop proper techniques and tools of study to identify and to track these pools of these ephemeral pools, because it's a real issue around to say, because others then dismiss to say Africa is just a basket case. Africa's role is to receive. But Africa is actually engaged in concerted efforts to respond to its challenges, but it does not do it in the way that the world has been trained to look at how things are done.
And that's where philanthropy by the poor comes in, that poor people are giving to each other. They're giving to each other at funerals when the children are born, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So this is the challenge, because again, philanthropy has been described as what is done by the rich. So everyone who becomes a billionaire or earns billionaire status, the next thing that they do, they establish a foundation. So it's like a formula, But then you wonder that what was happening before the billionaire got his billions? How a community is surviving? I come from Matebeleland myself, so every time there was a funeral in our neighborhood, there would be what they call zibuteni, where people walk around the neighborhood with a bag. So they are collecting maize meal or they are collecting money, etc. So that the funeral is not the responsibility of the bereaved family. The funeral is the responsibility of a community. The birth of a child, the same. So we are all, from the time of birth to the time of death, we are all beneficiaries of philanthropy that is done horizontally by peers. So this is philanthropy that is what we call from many to one or from many to many. Half the time we've just looked at philanthropy by the rich to poor communities. But within poor communities, there's a lot of giving that is taking place and hardly spoken about. So that's the sort of the solidarity we discuss in that chapter.
Thank you very much for that review, Tendai. And that was Citizens and Solidarity, which is the last chapter of the book authored by Tendai Murisa, which is Rethinking Citizens and Democracy.